I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. Thanks so much for tuning in to the podcast built to decolonize classical music. Always great to have you as a listener. You can learn more about this show if you're new and check out past opuses. Learn more about me and some of the folks who have helped make this possible at trilloquy.org, TRILLOQUY.org. You can also throw a couple shekels at the project while you're there. So thanks so much for your continued support. I'm very happy today to feature a conversation with Nkeiru Okoye. Nkeiru and I have been collaborating behind the scenes for a little while now, but she has a new recording that's out today as I'm recording this on March 27th that I can't wait for y'all to check out and enjoy. But just a little bit about Nkeiru. I'm reading from her bio here. Nkeiru Okoye is a Guggenheim Fellow and American Prize-winning composer, librettist, conductor, and cultural thought leader whose music redefines the boundaries of contemporary classical music through its fusion of narrative, improvisation, and cultural resonance. Her works are celebrated for their dynamic power, expressive clarity, and richly narrative voice. She's been praised by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and I Care If You Listen. So you can learn more about her on her website. I have a link in the description of this opus, and also a link to When the Caged Bird Sings, a new recording, again, a new work by Nkeiru Okoye featuring the University of Michigan Symphony Orchestra, the Exigence Chorus, and a number of really, really incredible soloists. So to get us into my conversation with Nkeiru, we're going to hear just a little snippet of this piece, When the Caged Bird Sings. Hope you enjoyed this excerpt and my chat with composer Nkeiru Okoye.
Identity is really tricky and even fluid these days. So, if I were to say maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, who am I? I am African-American. I'm a composer. I used to do programs of just music by Black composers, Black female composers, those types of things. And I think it's very important to have those types of discussions. But the pandemic and so much focus on identity, define yourself. Who am I speaking to? Or, basically bleed for me because you're Black. Mm-hmm. It really got me thinking. I had a couple of artists write to me and they'd want to pat themselves on their back. Hi, I discovered your music.
Yeah.
I was looking specifically for this type of music and I found your piece, whatever. And I'm thinking, okay, so you want me to pat you on the back for including me in your club? Mm-hmm. Or for not calling me the N-word? Is that what you're saying? Mm-hmm. So it got me really thinking about how I wanted to present myself, how I wanted my music to be presented. Because a lot of times we even have presenters who are like, oh, okay, now we have space for your music. This is Black History Month. This is Women's History Month. This is your table. We have this big table for everybody else, but we're propping you up. It's kind of like, a family meal and you have the adults at one table, mm-hmm. and then you have this little card table set up.
Right.
I don't want to be at the card table. That's it's insulting. It's really, really insulting. And I don't think people are trying to think about it that way, but then we have to be really careful about how we present ourselves. And so I started thinking maybe, maybe I'm a composer. And I'll also go back by saying that, people were looking at the list of topics in my repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't, I don't know that they necessarily think about this, but 99% of my music is commissioned. So the commissioners will sit down and say, "Hi, can you write a piece about this?
Mm-hmm.
Write a piece about Harriet Tubman." Well, actually, that was my idea, but still, write a piece about Phyllis Wheatley. Write a piece about President Obama. Write a piece about Martin Luther King Jr. Write this. So they are coming up with this list of heroes who are of African descent. But in doing that, other people looked at it and said, "Oh, she's militant. She is a militant composer. She's writing these very strong statements." And that's really not what that was. So again, who am I as a composer? I'm a Western classical concert music composer, and I am very influenced by folk music of people who look like me, just as Beethoven was influenced by of folk music. Brahms was interested in folk, was influenced by folk music. The 20th century, and I'm sure you would have remembered this from we all took the music history classes, but the 20th century publishers were looking for nationalism, so they made this call. Right. So you have Copland defining the American sound, and Gershwin, and still also, but all of these people were doing musical nationalism just like their European counterparts. So why can't I be that?
And when I think about identity, I also want to make sure that we talk about inspiration. Maybe a couple years ago now, in a feature that I did with a public radio station in North Carolina, I highlighted a work of yours called Dusk, this solo piano work, inspired by, at least in the liner notes of the recording that I have, inspired by a trip to Nigeria, where you also have heritage. We know we're talking today about this huge work for orchestra and chorus and soloists, but in your repertoire are also these very, I'll use the word intimate works for solo piano. So when you grab inspiration, well, first of all, I wonder if you can talk about your process of grabbing inspiration. If it just comes to you, are you looking for inspiration? And once you have it, how do you decide how that inspiration is going to manifest? I'm sure there's a world in which Why the Caged Bird Sings, which we're going to talk about, could exist as a chamber work, as a solo piano work. You chose these big forces. So again, I'm just wondering if you'll talk about both inspiration and how you manifest that inspiration. How do you decide what to do with that inspiration?
When we talk about Dusk, Dusk was one of my earlier pieces. And yes, it definitely had to do with, that piece that it comes from is called African Sketches. And Dusk is actually one of my most popular pieces because it's in a number of anthologies. So I think it's the Royal Academy of Music in Canada, where this is just part of their repertoire. Oh, wow. So all these little kids are learning how to play Dusk, which I think is awesome. Yeah, I lived in Nigeria for a while. I was born here in the US, and my father was Nigerian, and we spent some time going back and forth between his home in Nigeria and our home, which is which was on Long Island. And the things that you learn from these childhood adventures, they shape your life. So my mother was very careful to not use terms like black or white in the house. And part of my upbringing was also on a mission, like literally a mission. And it was for handicapped children
Hmm.
in lower New York State. So there really wasn't ethnicity. There were staff and there were students. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So I also remember that, when I was little, my mother would take my sister and me, and we would go with her to NYU. And she was a professor. And the students were learning, she was an occupational therapist. She's retired now. But we'd watch her and she's just teaching the class. And this was advanced neural anatomy. I mean, she was fierce. So she, her brother, my uncle Rocky, and my aunt Carol, they all went to Ivy League schools.
Mm.
So this was my understanding of Black identity.
Sure.
Then we're in Nigeria. My father was an electrical engineer. So I'm looking at this entire scope of my world is shaped by these visions of who we are as a people. Now, when you're in Nigeria, and it kind of doesn't make any difference which century you're in, it's a little bit like this whole vision of Wakanda, where,
Mm-hmm.
without the sci-fi elements, but everybody there looks like you. There are cues about language, like the streets. If you are in the Igbo district, there's going to be names that look like mine. I was like, wow, that's interesting. And I went to school with little girls who had my name. Okoye, my last name, is very popular for Nigerians. So there's a whole bunch of kids in the class who had my name. So this is an entirely different view. So when I look at a piece like Dusk from African Sketches, to me, it's kind of an African landscape. My teacher, who this was dedicated to, Noel DaCosta, was Jamaican, but his parents were missionaries, and he was born in Nigeria.
Hmm.
So this was always kind of a private joke between the two of us. His identity, my identity, and when he left us, he put such a spiritual sense on all of us. And so that was the piece that I wrote about his passing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And again, just to the point of inspiration,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like, you said that 90 to 95% of the works you do are commissions, but,
Yeah.
I imagine there must also be, just what's born from your lived experience and what you're naturally inspired by. Maybe I
Yeah.
should ask, as we relate this to what When the Caged Bird Sings,
Uh-huh.
where
Yeah.
where on that scale does this land? Because first of
Uh-huh.
all,
Right.
thinking about the Maya Angelou aspects of it, that just sort of lives in our psyche in many ways, and
Oh, yeah.
can very easily be a point of inspiration. But
Mhm.
also, it's such a large work.
Yes.
It would make sense for it to just also be the result of a
Mhm.
commission.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, just
Okay.
this
Yeah.
point of inspiration and how
Uh-huh.
you choose how that inspiration manifests.
Well, you know, with When the Caged Bird Sings, it was one of these things where it was just at the beginning of the pandemic. I had just come back from this huge debut with the Detroit Symphony, and suddenly we are all on lockdown, and I live by myself. So there I am in my apartment in lower New York State, and I just thought, wow, when this thing is over, we are going to need a time to gather together and to heal, just kind of communally. So I began thinking, what is it that I would want this commemoration to look like.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote down some sketches for a multi-movement piece that would be like a Protestant worship service. So like a mass, but Protestant. So it would be multi-movement. There would be a couple of sayings by elders, obviously scripture passages. And so I wrote this down, I developed it, and I have a folder on my computer, and it's just for ideas. It's
Mm.
an idea garden. So I put it in the garden. 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, it's a very short amount of time, I get this call from this conductor at University of Michigan. He wanted a piece for large ensemble. He wanted orchestra, chorus, and soloists for a long, large scale piece. And I was like, oh, have I got the concept for you? That is how that happened.
It sounds like you planted the seeds, and the University of Michigan brought the rain that watered the seeds.
Yeah. So sometimes that happens. And, so I've got a couple of projects there in the Idea Garden, and often it will be what usually happens is a commissioner will come to me and say, I need a piece for this specific ensemble on this topic. So it's a mixed bag, and it's a blessing. Yeah.
Just curious, are there times when the commissions come or the requests come and there isn't something that exactly matches that in your garden and you have to pull from elsewhere? Or do all of your works come from what you have in this digital garden in some way or another?
No, most some of the works in the garden have grown into fruition, but most often people come to me with these ideas that I just would not have thought of. And I'm delighted because, when you grow your garden, you have, I don't know, petunias, roses. This is what's comfortable for you. Where
Mm-hmm.
sometimes not what's comfortable for you, but this is what your vision is. So when someone else comes in and they're like, hey, can you do this? It's like, I wouldn't have thought about that, but yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, gosh, it was like 2 seasons ago, I get this call uh, from Juilliard. And they're like, okay, I want you to write a trombone quartet. And I'm like, wait. So I wrote my first ever trombone quartet, and I had a great time. But this is not something that I would have come up with, and it definitely
Sure.
was not in my idea garden. So yeah, I'm really happy about that.
Great, great. Yeah, good to get that peek into what your process looks like, at least in that way. So I want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about When the Caged Bird Sings. So
Mhm.
I understand that this isn't simply a musical adaptation of the Maya Angelou poem that I think will come to mind for many people when they hear that title. I wonder if you can talk about some of the other narratives or the deeper narratives that listeners
Yeah.
should understand as they approach this new recording.
I'm inspired by Maya Angelou. I mean, who isn't?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I was a kid, one of my birthday presents, like one of the formulative birthday presents that you get,
Mm-hmm.
was what was available of the anthology at that point. And while I didn't necessarily understand the whole thing, this was something that I treasured.
Hmm.
And but it's a piece about the coming of age of this young Black girl in, I guess, the 30s and 40s. And this girl has trauma that is put on her. And so as I'm thinking of this piece, which it's kind of like think of it like a special service
Mm-hmm.
at some African-American churches. And you'd have a celebrant, a preacher who is talking about, speaking about Women's Day, And she's got some inspiration from Maya Angelou and some just about women in general. I didn't want the focus of that to be this traumatized little girl from the 30s and 40s, because if we are going back to that, it would mean that we haven't necessarily grown.
Right.
Right. I also looked at the poem Sympathy from Paul Laurence Dunbar, and that is where Maya Angelou got her title. It's from that poem. And this poem, it just really hits hard because it's still something that resonates with us as Black people. And so I don't know, it's maybe because of the pandemic, maybe because of the deluge of people coming and asking me to pour my spirit out and my Black pain and the rest of it, I just thought, I'm writing a different heroine. And the commission was such that it just basically, we want you to write this large scale piece. The topic was completely mine. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to write about a new Black heroine. And this is someone who is the benefit generations later of Maya, of Martin, of Malcolm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so many others, of course.
Yes, of course, of course. So she has this story, and it's told really in 6 parts, but then in 4 large songs, arias. And these are all interspersed in this special church service. So here we are in church, and because I do write sung stories or opera, of course, there's an opera inside this piece.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's told by different characters in her life and then by her. And so in the first part of it, it's told by her mother, and all of these people are praying and they're looking to God for guidance. So the mother is thanking God for this child inside of her. And then the father is looking for guidance because he's gotten a job. He's moved into this community that would have been, it's beyond his imagination. And he's gotten this new job, and he's moved his wife and his daughter into this gorgeous house. And he's getting racially profiled.
Mm.
Yeah. How do you deal with that? Where is your American dream? Then we had Charisse in high school, and her guidance counselor is now telling this story, and he's Catholic. So he's confessing. And he's confessing about something that he did to support Charisse.
Who is the little girl?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because she's gotten herself in some trouble, and he intercedes. And so there's this big crisis about how he interceded. And then we hear from Charisse herself. So I want people to be able to see themselves inside this story.
Hmm.
And in some ways, if you take race out of it, we've all had crises of conscience. We've all had moments where we're thankful for, I have not gone through motherhood, but mothers out there thinking, hey, I want to protect this child. And thank you for giving me this child. And there's going to be some moment when we've done something that may not, it kind of gives you a crisis of conscience, something that's too hard to bear. We all, at a certain point, will want to call on something. And for me, it's that higher power. And I'm going to pray and say, hey, God, how do I handle this? What do I do? And so I want people to feel heard. It's not a piece for Black people. It's not a piece for white people. It's just a piece of music. And a lot of people, what surprised me is the people who just experienced a spiritual renewal by listening to this piece as we were recording it. And so it's been an amazing journey for me.
When you talk about wanting to for people to see themselves in this
Mhm.
story, in this
Mhm.
piece of music,
Yeah.
I can't help but to think about the various aesthetics that you put forward,
Yes.
from and dare I say many of which are black aesthetics. When I think about the gospel that I hear in
Mhm.
this, of course we have
Mhm.
the very traditional Western operatic aesthetic
Mhm.
that plays a
Yes.
big role in this piece. I wonder if you can speak more to your choice to incorporate
Mhm.
so many different flavors into this
Yeah.
single piece of music. Why was that important?
Well, I don't know that it was important the way that you think about it. These are just aspects of me.
Hmm.
Of course, they're going to be inside this piece, especially when the piece is, it's like 75 minutes long. It's going to reflect these different things. Now, I'll also point out here that there are two spaces inside this piece where presenters can bring in a gospel choir. And these are just pieces that reflect after something's been said. So for those, I looked at my collaborators and said, hey, you know what? I don't write gospel music. I write things that sound like gospel music,
Mm-hmm.
but I want you to have an authentic Black church experience. So y'all just go ahead. I've given you, here's the hymn. Here are the keys as it works in with my overall flow. John Cage would do these indeterminacy type of things, and he would just allow for, here's a couple of minutes where anything goes. So this is my organized chaos. um, I want you to come up with something for this hymn and for this hymn. And it was magical. And I just loved that I was able to step out of the way and allow this to happen. And I just would not have arranged it that way. And I'm so glad that I'm able to accept that this is what I do, but y'all do this so much better
Mm-hmm.
because this is where you come from. This is
So
this is your training.
so
Yeah.
that'll be realized in future performances in different ways, depending on who the gospel choir is,
Oh,
who
absolutely.
the
It can
folks
be.
are.
Yeah.
How does this aspect show up specifically in this recording that's coming out?
So we have these two hymns, and they are performed by exegets. Now, it's hard to get a better choir than exegets because they
Mm-hmm.
can sing anything. They're all opera singers, and they know how to sing classical, but they also do jazz, pop, gospel. They're just so versatile. So, um, they have arrangements for "I Am Thine, O Lord," and for "Do Not Pass Me By." So it's these two arrangements, and they are written out, and they are in the score, and they're available. Um, these are things that, again, someone else could bring in their choir, and they would have this. But
Mm-hmm.
you need a choir that can read to execute most of the music of this piece.
Mm.
But for some reason, people ask me to write pieces that can involve a gospel choir. So So I just thought, okay, here's a piece. This is the way that we can do this. Bring in your gospel choir, and have them sing these two numbers. And there's a couple of other things that can be sung by a non-reading choir.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I remember, for this performance, the way that we got this particular sound, we got exegets to be our singing congregants. So they are your Black church choir. If you look at the video, you see them. They're all kind of dressed in blue and kind of in 1950s,
Mm-hmm.
1960s type of things. Yeah. So they are singing congregants, and they gave us a specific timbre. And I have to say that the University of Michigan choirs was fantastic, but they were prepared by Eugene Rogers, who also is the founding director of Exigence.
That's right.
So it was really, really special to collaborate with him on this and to see what he was able to do. And we had to really talk about some of the things that were going on in this piece.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the other collaborators and soloists on this
Mhm.
work, but I
Yeah.
wanted to highlight, as you've mentioned, that these are University of Michigan musicians,
Mhm.
singers,
Mhm.
instrumentalists.
Yes.
I know, understandably for many composers, maybe even most composers, the dream or sort of the goal is to work with professional ensembles. But in my experience, there's something special about working with these high quality, high level student ensembles. I wonder if
Yeah.
you can speak to your experience working with these students.
Oh, the students were absolutely great. And this was a partnership that I had with the University of Michigan over a couple of years.
Hmm.
So it wasn't like a come in, okay, she's gone. The vision was for me to have a number of interactions with these students. So this orchestra had recorded Voices Shouting Out, my orchestral piece that a number of people have done. I have another piece, Invitation to a Die-In. They recorded that.
Mm.
They did another one. So they knew my music at this point, and it made it easier for them to understand some of the musical intricacies and some of the things that I do, which when I'm not writing with standard Western music notation, when I'm doing the things that are more African-American, Afro-diasporic, those
Hmm.
type of things, it was much easier for them to get it because they had been introduced to my music before. Yeah. These kids were absolutely, absolutely amazing. They were, a lot of them were working at professional levels,
Of course.
and it was such a joy and a privilege to work with them, and also with Ken Kiesler, who was their conductor and who is the one who spearheaded this. It's called the Michigan Orchestra Repertory Equity Project,
Mm.
MORE. And it was his understanding, hey, part of the reason that people don't understand that there are Black composers out there, it's the access to recordings.
Hmm. That's right.
So let's record these pieces. I thought, wow, this is this is pretty amazing. And this idea that it's not so much picking this ingenue, plucking this ingenue up, because a lot of people have that idea. It's this emotional payoff. I'm going to find this diamond in the rough, and I'm going to get the emotional payoff.
Hmm. Saviorism, I think some people
Oh,
may even say.
absolutely. And it's not necessarily a conscious type of thing. It just happens.
Hmm.
Right. And this was a no. I specifically looked up composers who were doing certain things, and I want you. And you can write whatever it is that you want, as long as it's a substantial piece. It's got to be 60 minutes or more. And it's for choir, orchestra, and soloists. Add a narrator if you like. So, yeah.
For the composers listening, or maybe even some of the commissioners, I wonder if
Mhm.
you can speak to the benefits of working specifically with universities, with student organizations.
Mhm.
I have my own experience from my side of the work, in which I really advocate for working with the universities. I can,
Uh,
just to be frank, I'll name budgets are usually a little different with
oh, yes.
with
Yes.
universities,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
but there's
Mhm.
so many benefits. I wonder,
Yeah.
again, for the
Mhm.
people who may really have their eye on getting these professional orchestras to
Uh-huh.
make these recordings with and to do this work with, which is valid, a valid
Oh, very much
goal.
so. Yeah.
But with that considered. I wonder again if you could just speak to the unique benefits of working with this
Mhm.
type of institution as opposed to the professional orchestras.
Yeah. Well, let's be very clear. University of Michigan Orchestra, they are a recording orchestra. So there's a distinction there. And I think that Ken Kiesler he would want that distinction to be known.
Hmm.
They are working at
Noted.
professional level.
Noted.
Yes, yes. But as a composer, often when you have the new piece, that is the piece that gets the least amount of rehearsal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if it's a short piece, it kind of doesn't make any difference because it's there and then it's gone. But if it's a longer piece and you write in ways that are not in keeping with the Western canon, you may need to explain certain techniques. You may need to try a couple of different things out. And some of what I had written was aleatoric. That needs a lot of rehearsal. So these folks have rehearsals regularly. It's not like your standard orchestra where they only have, they've allotted, here's this
Three,
concert.
maybe four
Allotted. Yes,
rehearsals.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So this was their curriculum for the semester.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. Not the entire semester, but this was their curriculum. This was their assignment. So this is different. It's a privilege. I just came back from, I had just come back from Montgomery. I had a piece called A Time for Jubilee.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I was in residence with Montgomery Symphony Orchestra. They'd asked me to write a piece that commemorates the march from Selma to Montgomery. And so they also had they had student involvement. They had a mass choir, and it was from three different choirs. It was Tuskegee, Alabama State, and I want to say Hillsdale. That's not the name of the school, but there were three different choirs, and each of them, that was their curriculum. So when
Mm-hmm.
they came in, they were excited. Some of them wanted to know more about civil rights because I had written this piece.
Wow.
You just don't get that type of energy coming from adults. It's just not the same type of thing. And students they just tend to be more flexible. So I actually had the conductor and I worked this out. I was like, okay, so this piece is about civil rights. I don't know, it needs to be a little bit more something. So we actually made up signs like the ones that you would see
Mm-hmm.
during the civil rights. And we had this, some of the students were coming in holding these signs. And the audience got you could see they were surprised, and we wanted that element of surprise, and we warned people in advance that this was going to happen. But you never actually expect to see a protest in the middle of a concert.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but you can do these things with students.
And it seems like with all of the benefits of,
Mhm.
I'll use the word multidisciplinary outcomes,
Mhm.
now we're talking about visual art, we're talking about performance practice, with all of the benefits of working with these institutions, well, and specifically an institution like the University of Michigan, you
Mhm.
must feel a sense of responsibility. You are officially a part of someone's collegiate experience when they
Yeah.
become professionals and they get
Yeah.
into the field, when they become old people shepherded in the
Mhm.
new generation, when they
Yeah.
think about their collegiate experience specifically, this is a part of that. I wonder if that's a part of your framework of thinking as you take on a collaboration like this.
Yeah, it's yes, thank you for bringing up all the weight that
The collaboration is done now, so there's no reason to be nervous or anything.
Yeah, there's a sense of responsibility. I'm often the only composer that people meet.
Sure.
At this last concert, my aunt and my cousin came, and this was my cousin's first classical music concert.
Hmm.
And her cousin is there having a world premiere. It's a huge responsibility. You know, as the students are seeing me, and some of them have studied my music, some of them played it as an undergraduate student. They've gone to my web page. There's a coloring book out, the Rachel Barton Pine
Oh yeah.
coloring book of Black composers.
Yeah.
Yes, so some of them have seen that. They've played Dusk. They've seen Nyaho's anthology, which also had Dusk in there. So there's a bit of that. And there's the educator in me that says, okay, so right now, I'm not educating you about music because that's someone else's job to bring that to you. What I am teaching you about is social sciences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Here's this idea. How do we interpret this? How do we make this real? How do we make this relevant? Um, so there's that aspect of it that your music teachers don't necessarily teach. This is what the composer comes in and says, hey, this is my idea, but this is the history that this is in. So I had to become the expert in this period. So,
Yeah.
so that I can translate it. I also remember a couple of years ago, I had taught a vocal masterclass at Juilliard. And so, the Juilliard Prep, it's their Saturday program, and the kids are coming in, and I'd been asked to write a piece for their permanent repertoire collection. And the piece that I wrote, it was for their vocal studio. And so this is one of these things that I get to choose. And I said, okay, well, let me write something from the classics. There's Whatever Our Souls Are Made Of from Wuthering Heights, which is out right now as a movie. And you have Catherine singing about Heathcliff. And then there's Jane Eyre. It's called Mr. Rochester. And it's a scene from Jane Eyre. This is where Jane just tells Mr. Rochester off because he's been leading her on and doing all these things. It's my favorite scene from that. And there's also Darcy's proposal. And it's literally Darcy proposing to Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice. And they are arias, but they are more in the style of something more contemporary. And so I had to explain the performance practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I went to my opera singer friends and I was like, well, I don't know. They've asked me to explain this performance practice, and these are texts in English. And so how do you change your technique? How do you alter? It's not really change, but how do you shape your technique so people really understand the lyrics?
Mm-hmm.
So I, did my poll of my opera singer friends, and I came back, and this was their composer experience. And I thought, wow, these kids are so great. I love working with them. And I remember when they did their performance of them, they had done a program of music by Black women. And many of the parents came up and were thanking me because they said that their kids had a great time in this class. And I just thought, I don't ever want to be that clinician who comes in. You see these master classes at these very important places, and you have these very important musicians who then go by and they traumatize these students. And I've had enough of those experiences. I never, ever want to do that to somebody, to a child and to someone's child. And so this responsibility, it's not about me as a composer, but it's as me as a human connecting with the next generation of humans who are following in our paths.
Beautiful, beautiful. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't give you an opportunity to give a shout out to the incredible soloists that are featured on this recording as well.
Yes. Yes. So, I'm just going to go from soprano and work my way down because these are all people that I knew them before. I admired them and had always wanted to work with them. So we start with Angela Brown. And I remember having met her when I was in Baltimore, and she did a show with Kishna Davis, and the show was called Opera from a Sister's Point of View.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wow, it's really amazing. So I got to work with Miss Angela. And I remember for each of these arias, for each singer, I would go in and I would say, okay, I want to talk about your voice. So it's my vocal interview, and I've got this sheet that I have. And give me your high note, give me your low note. Okay, what is your speaking pitch? When you are emphatic about something, what does it sound like? What pitch is that? What's this? Which really specifically written for their voice.
Mm.
And I'm taking it off of my impression, off of this person's conversation. And so the piece, that person's aria, is specifically written for them. So other people can sing it, but it's written to highlight this person's affect. So Angela just loves the aria that I had written for her. Our second singer was Christy Dachelle, and someone had suggested her, and I thought, yes, that's perfect. Absolutely, yes, she's the one. And I remember when I spoke to Christy about this, she said, well, I kind of want to do this, but I don't sing opera. Now, Christy's cousin, I might add, is Solomon Howard, who opera singer, and I want to say he was in Champion, or and some of these other substantial
Mm-hmm.
pieces. So again, I'm writing these arias specifically for this person and for this person's strengths. And I had heard Christy sing. She came to Louisville, and she did a jazz show. It was like a Nat King Cole Christmas. And I thought, I'm not going to write you an aria because that's not what you sing.
Mm-hmm.
So when I did the when I did my vocal interview with her, we talked about her expertise. And there's a part in there where you hear this bird singing, and some of that, the style of it, is taken off of what I heard Christy improvising. So it's that careful. Then Izakaya, our Helden tenor, and Izakaya and I met. We were both young professionals in Baltimore, and I usually do not work with Helden tenors.
Okay.
Yes, usually I work with more kind of character singers. And Izakaya and I had worked on a project that Tulsa Opera had put together, Greenwood Overcomes.
Right.
Mm. So I have this one aria, A Kiss on the Forehead, and Izakaya wanted to sing one of my pieces. So he sang A Kiss on the Forehead. And I thought, see, this is why you want to be serenaded by a Helden tenor.
And can you briefly just explain the Hilden tenor? I don't
Sure,
think I'm familiar with that terminology.
Yeah. So these are your tenors who sing Wagner. So they have these high voices, but they have the heft of a baritone.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And you think of Pavarotti,
Sure.
those types of, yes. And so, yes. So okay, so I've got this project, and you're going to teach me how to write for your voice. Yeah. So, and I would tell all of the singers, I was like, look, this is the way that I work. I'm writing this aria specifically to make your voice. I always use the term sparkle.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If, when I write this, the ink is not dry on it. So if something does not work for your voice, the music is wrong. So tell me what you need changed, and we'll work, we'll work that out.
Mm-hmm.
So the other singers came back to me maybe once, maybe twice. Izakaya came back a couple of times, but it was more, we don't sing this vowel up here because if you place the vowel here, it sounds like this, as
Mm-hmm.
sounding like that. I thought, wow, this is really interesting. So we just had the best time working on his aria. And I have to say, when he performed that, he had everybody just spellbound. They were just sitting there waiting for, what's he going to sing next? It was so dramatic. So that was just so much fun with him. And then, of course, Jubilant Sykes, who um, I just wanted to work with him forever. And this was his last recording.
Wow.
Yeah. I encountered Jubilant the first time in Baltimore. I remember hearing his voice in Borders Books and Music. It was his CD, Jubilant. And it was gospel, it was jazz, it was spirituals, whatever. And it was with jazz in the background. Whatever this is, I must have this. This was my moment. And I hadn't yet written Harriet Tubman, which is my first opera.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, something about this, hearing this obviously classically trained singer, he's singing spirituals, he's being accompanied by jazz. I just thought, this is someone who understands my world. So it's not that my world makes sense now because of him, but more that this is someone who understands my musical world, just like so many of us wonder, is there someone out there who's listening, someone else who hears this same cacophony, this same where and when do I enter inside this world of concert music? And here it was on this album. So
Mm-hmm.
of course I bought it. Of course I listened to it over and over and over again. And about 3 weeks later, I'm on a plane to, was it London? Or maybe I was on, no. I was on my way to New York, back from New York. 3 weeks later, I was on my way back from New York, and the stewardess seats me next to this Black man, head was bald, and I started looking, got
Mm-hmm.
glasses on. I was like, wait, did I just buy your CD? So this is Jubilant Saints.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, it is coming back from something at the Apollo, and we had this conversation that I now I'm the person who is having kind of random conversations with people who might have heard this or heard that, and I just think of his humanity, and I I didn't think that this was someone who I'd see again, work with again, but this was just the voice that I kept in mind. And so all those years later, the pandemic happens and a couple of projects happened, and I've been writing for his voice without knowing that that was the voice I was writing for. But this was the standard. I wanted a Black theatrical baritone. So something happened, and one of my cast members fell through for a different project. And I said, well, this obviously suits the voice of Jubilant Sykes. Why don't we call him?
Yeah.
I'm like, he's not going to say yes to do this project. I said, well, we could ask. You never know. So I reached out to him on Facebook. And a couple of days later, I get this email back, and it was just, hi, I write for your voice, and I just want you to know how much I just appreciate your voice and that type of thing. Not overly fawning, but just let him know,
Yeah.
yeah. And so he wrote back, and then he kind of became Big Brother Jubilant. And for the proposal for this piece, as I'm writing this proposal, they said that I could work with whatever opera singers I wanted. I said, fantastic. So for soprano, I was like, well, we could use so-and-so, so-and-so, here's a couple of the sopranos. For the mezzo, I wanted this. For tenor, something else. And for the baritone, I was like, Jubilant Sykes, choice 2, Jubilant Sykes, choice 3, someone who sounds like Jubilant Sykes.
Right. Wow.
They got me Jubilant Sykes. Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Well, we certainly cannot wait for this recording to come out. It comes out on March 27th. That's a Friday.
Mhm.
As folks can check that out online, streaming, anywhere that they engage music. I think just to wrap us up here, as we talked about identity at the beginning of this conversation. There are so many people that might hear this conversation, might happen to learn about this piece of music and identify it as something that they don't necessarily relate to, whether because it's opera or they see the title and say, oh, I'm not so much into poetry, or, so there's so many assumptions that we can make based on how we identify a piece of music. I wonder, what are your encouragements? What's your pitch for this piece of music as something that really can relate to all in many ways?
Huh. Um, this is a piece that I wrote about communal healing. It is a musical ceremony, and there's going to be something for you in it.
She Shall Not Be Moved from Nkeiru Okoye's When the Caged Bird Sings. That recording out now on all streaming, courtesy of Naxos. Be sure to check that out. Beautiful, beautiful recording. Congrats to all of the students involved, the professional singers and soloists. A really beautiful example of coming together of all peoples toward the common goal of creating good music. So thanks so much, so much, so much for putting that together, and to Nkeiru for writing that beautiful piece of music. Of course, there are so many things that we can think about on this subject of When the Caged Bird Sings. Of course, there's the Maya Angelou prose. There are, other writers who have mused on it, and it even shows up in Buddhism. So for the Trilloquy, I wanted to share a little bit of that and speak to how this is speaking to me. So, the 13th century priest Nichiren once wrote, when a caged bird sings, the birds who are flying in the sky are prompted to gather around it. And when the birds who are flying in the sky gather around it, the bird in the cage strives to get out. So this striving to get out, of course, it's a core aspect of Buddhism, but I think it can apply to any spiritual practice or way of engaging the world, never giving up on the realities we want to see for ourselves, despite the circumstances, despite that proverbial cage that we might find ourselves in. And there are so many of us in a cage of one sort or another these days, whether it be a financial cage or the cage of a job we don't quite love. Maybe you're caged into a relationship that ain't right, or dealing with the lack of a relationship. That can feel like a cage too. I could go on, but what I'm hoping to impart here briefly is that it's easy for us to let the circumstances keep us from singing, to keep us from striving toward our mission and toward our purpose, no matter what. If I want to put this on myself, I have to admit that the cage of a lack of capacity has been what I've been singing through. There just aren't enough hours in the day for me to get to it all. Certainly not if I want to get a good night's rest. But instead of being resolved to fall behind, I'm determined to keep up every day. Even as I record this, I'm thinking about the plane I got to catch here in a couple hours for my next work trip. But you know what? I'm going to get those grant worksheets filled out. I'm going to prepare for these meetings, manage my staff. I do it all with a smile, singingly even. I think the other part of this to think about is those birds that are in the sky gathering around the bird that's in a cage. It doesn't really help the bird in that cage to grow resentment or anger toward the birds that are free. That doesn't make that cage go away. And that doesn't make the birds in the sky any less free. And I think that we could get caught up into that sometimes as well. There are certainly realities that I see other people living that I would love to live. But you know what? this is mine to live. This is my life to live, and I can make it my goal to get to what my reality looks like. I don't have to be that blue bird that's flying in the way that it's flying. I'm going to call myself the blackbird. I'll be the blackbird that as soon as I get free, I'm going to soar higher, flap harder. I don't know. I could, go on with this for a long time, but again, what I'm trying to impart is that we gotta keep it focused. We gotta keep moving forward. Listening to Nkeiru's new work really inspired me to think about all of these things for myself. So I hope that you'll not only check out Nkeiru Okoye's new work, but to keep singing in your own life, in your own way, and think about as society just continues to do what it's doing right now, to not let that cage defeat us. And hey, maybe one day we'll sing so loudly that the person with the keys to the cage gets tired of us and lets us free. That's what I'm hoping for. Anyway, thanks so much again for listening. Just a brief musing there on my end. Thanks to Nkeiru and her whole team for getting this conversation just set up. And I'll share another one with y'all soon. It's actually also bird themed to give you a preview of what's coming up. But until then, keep singing. Peace.